Hello, everyone. Welcome again. My name is Flavio Diaz. I'm your graduate admissions counselor here for the College of Communications at DePaul University. I want to welcome you all for tonight's faculty talk, which is titled Writing and Thinking in the Age of AI, Artificial Intelligence, presented by our very own senior professional lecturer, Professor Amy Merrick. Welcome, welcome. We host these faculty talks throughout the year to showcase our faculty, their research, their expertise, and we certainly hope that by the end of tonight's talk, you feel excited about the topic, but also excited about the vast graduate educational opportunities here at DePaul University. This is essentially a taste of what you can expect if you're in one of our classrooms here at DePaul. To kick things off, I'm also joined tonight by my esteemed colleague, Professor and Director of Graduate Studies, Dr. Matt Regis. Matt will go ahead and deliver some welcoming remarks and introduce our speaker. So take it away, Matt.
Hey, thanks very much, Flavio. First, I want to give a shout out to Flavio and the grad admission team. This has been a really successful year. This was a program started by our colleague, Dr. Paul Booth, Associate Dean in the college in partnership with Alumni Relations. I know some of the folks on the call, familiar faces, and we know you're a DePaul alum or a DePaul student or a DePaul faculty member, but some of you joining us may be a bit less familiar about DePaul University. We are the nation's largest Catholic university. We're the largest private university in the Midwest. We have around 21,000 students. This talk is put on by DePaul's Graduate Studies in the College of Communication and Graduate Admission. Communication is one of 10 colleges and schools, over 200,000 alums spread across the world, but we're particularly strong in Chicagoland, where the majority of our alums choose to reside. We have 300 plus undergrad and graduate programs, very much a comprehensive university. We are represented from coast to coast and around the country, as we can see from our participants joining us this evening, or should I say, maybe afternoon if you're on the West Coast. And then we have a very high success rate in terms of our graduates, in terms of employment and career goals. And with that, I think we can go to the next slide. It is my distinct pleasure to get to introduce a wonderful colleague and friend in Professor Amy Merrick, who is part of so many different programs and things that happen here at DePaul, from being a faculty advisor to award-winning student media and student organizations like SPJ. Amy's official credentials: she has a MFA in creative writing from Pacific University, and we may have heard from those purple folks up to the north. Um, had a guest speaker last night that actually said is an alum of none other than Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism. Before joining us full time as a now senior professional lecturer in our college, Amy has a distinguished career in business journalism, including at an organization I hope we've all heard of called the Wall Street Journal. I was just bribing my students with bonus points, Amy, in my business skills seminar to subscribe to the journal. Amy teaches a wide range of courses for us in journalism, as well as a senior capstone class. I'm also particularly grateful that she has been with us every year teaching in our master's in professional communication, a course that is more focused on multimedia and content creation. And so looking forward to tonight's presentation. Before I turn the floor over to Amy, Flavia, if you could advance us. I just want to shout out our final faculty talk of this series for this year. This will be our sixth and final presentation. We will put the sign up link in the chat, but you can also whip out your phone and go to the QR code. Our colleague, Professor Kristen Pingelli, will be doing and also a very timely talk on soft skills for a hard knock world. That will be May 7th, same time, 5:30 Chicago start time. And next slide. And then we also want to give a shout out, a call out. I mentioned the professional communication MA. We call it ProCom. This is an accelerated, fully online, cohort-based 1 year program for helping level up working comms professionals. And yeah, there I am looking up back at myself there. More exciting, we've got none other than Alicia Webb, who's a Rockstar alum. She has her own PR consultancy. And if you've been thinking about going back to grad school and maybe thinking about this accelerated, fully online format, although we also get together in person, we're going to do an information session next week on April 22nd. So we will also throw that information into the chat as well. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Professor Amy Merrick.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thanks for the nice introduction. And everybody, thank you so much for being here this afternoon and evening. I know some of you are procrastinating on your taxes, and we're glad to have you. I think 5 people are going to now go log off because they just remembered to do their taxes. But I promise this will be more fun than that. So thank you so much for being here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We'll make sure that everything is working properly, and we'll get it nice and pretty for you. Can everybody see that okay? Great. Always love
Looks
to get
good.
that thumbs up just to know we're going in the right direction. All right. So, what I want to talk with you about tonight, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts about this as well, is what we're seeing in research about how AI is affecting us. So, a lot of initial research as our AI chatbots became popular and commercialized was taking a look at the outputs, what kind of writing or what kind of computer code was being produced, and looking at that in terms of efficiency, speed, productivity, and kind of quality of output. Now, more recently, in the last year or so, we're starting to see research about how does this affect us as human beings in terms of our skill development, in terms of our critical thinking skills. And there's some really interesting research that is getting at this question in a few different ways that we'll look at tonight. So, self-reported critical thinking in terms of survey data. We'll look at quiz scores for people who have to learn something new and then apply it using AI or not. We'll look at practice essays. We'll even look at brain scans. And all of these are getting at what you have probably heard as common advice, which is use AI to create a draft and then use your human critical thinking skills to review and revise it. I think we hear this all the time. And so this research looks at what happens when you do that. And I think directionally, as we look at these different types of research, there are some interesting kind of initial conclusions and some cautions in doing that, but also some interesting directions, both for further research and for all of us kind of exploring how might we use these tools as part of our work. So that's mainly what we're going to be talking about today. I want to say before we get started that there are some important things that we're not going to be talking about. So this talk is not primarily about the environmental impact of AI, for example, in terms of water and electricity usage. It's not primarily about intellectual property or potential effects on the labor market. All of those are very interesting and important. They could all be talks of their own. But just to keep this focus, we're mainly going to be talking about writing and critical thinking. Though if you want to talk about some of these other topics, glad to open it up when we get to the Q&A in a few minutes. So that's kind of what we are aiming for in the next few minutes. So Matt already gave a really nice introduction, and I'm not going to repeat it, obviously, but I wanted to share a little bit about why I got interested in this topic. And so I come from this in a journalism and creative writing background. And I was in a lot of discussions where we kept talking about how important it was as AI becomes ubiquitous, for people from different backgrounds to be part of this conversation. And I kept saying, oh, we really need this to be interdisciplinary, and that would be very useful. And finally, I looked, and instead of just spouting off about it, I decided I would learn some more. So I'm about 2 years into working on a master's in computer science here at DePaul, specifically because I'm interested in AI transparency, AI ethics, and how AI will affect these fields of journalism and education that I've been involved in for a long time. And so that's what got me interested in this topic and has kind of led me down this path. So with all that said, let's take a look at some of this research. I'm going to start with survey data. And this is a study that Microsoft Research put out last year. This is probably the best known of the studies that I'm going to talk about today. You may have seen this. And this is asking knowledge workers, like probably many of you who are here, how they use AI in their work and their perception of critical thinking. So these people were in a variety of fields, everything from PR, software development, nonprofit management. They talked about how they use AI in real world examples. So more than 900 different examples that they talked about. And what the directional result was from the survey is that people felt that the more that they relied on AI to do a task, the less critical thinking that they were putting in. So there's a real shift from kind of task execution to oversight, but a decrease in engagement. And so one of the things that the researchers really talk about is that maybe you don't need a lot of critical thinking for low stakes situations, but if you don't practice it, there's a real risk of losing it. And you may not then have it available in the high stakes situations. And this is one of the things that people talked about in the survey was there's a kind of disengagement. And the more confident they felt that AI could do the task, the less they were engaged in kind of reviewing the work. As AI models get better and better, this is going to be more of a challenge and a concern for us. So the way that the researchers talk about this, and this may also be a quote that if you've been looking at this, you see this, is that one of the ironies of automation is that if you take human judgment out of some of our more routine tasks, you are losing then the ability to get involved in these high stakes situations because you are no longer practicing your critical thinking and those skills atrophy. This then leads us unprepared for the times when we really do think that human judgment matters. So this is one of the cautions that the researchers have looking at the survey data is this real risk of kind of disengagement. That said, there is some interesting finding that comes out of the study that could be useful for us. And that is that the more confident people were that they could complete a task on their own, the more they felt they were able to use their critical thinking and the more reflective they were about how these tools could or could not work for them. So one thing that is going to kind of keep coming up is that when people had a solid foundation of knowledge on their own, their critical thinking, they were able to employ more. They were more engaged in their work. And so we are going to kind of see over and over this idea of complement rather than replacement, and this idea that if we outsource everything, our skills are going to start to atrophy. But if we have a solid base of skills and maintain it, then AI can be useful in giving feedback and kind of moving us forward. So that's what we'll talk about. And so that survey data, that's kind of self-reported data, is sort of our first point in thinking about how does AI affect critical thinking. The next one is looking at quiz scores on people who are asked to learn something new. This is a relatively small study of 50 software developers. And while it is a different field than writing, the conclusions that the researchers reach, I think have important implications for writers as well. A lot of these studies are pretty new. Many of them have not yet been published in peer-reviewed journals. So there's always this caveat that this field is developing really quickly, and we're going to learn more as we go. But these are some initial directions that I think are useful for us to look at. So in this study, and this study is by research fellows at Anthropic, which you might know as the maker of Claude, very popular large language model. So they asked these software developers to learn a new programming library. And what that basically is, if you're not familiar with that, is a set of kind of commands that you can use in programming to complete tasks more easily. So they were asked to learn this programming library and then complete a programming task, either with or without AI. And then everybody had to take a quiz on what they had learned. Whether you used AI or not for the task, you could not use AI for the quiz. And so what they found is that using AI on this new task did not save a lot of time. But what it did was if you used AI, quiz scores went down dramatically. So the more you used AI in the task, the worse you did on that quiz later. And again, you could kind of see these signs that we saw in the survey data that when you relied on an LLM to finish your work for you, there was less engagement and less critical thinking. Now, again, that said, there's some interesting findings here that we might be able to use ourselves. So the Anthropic researchers looked at the group that specifically used AI, and they broke them down into different categories. And one of the things they saw is there was a real difference in how people used AI and the quiz scores that resulted. So when you look at this graph here, they're looking at completion time, how long it took to do that task. And then they're looking at quiz scores, kind of top to bottom. The group on the bottom were those that really outsourced their thinking to AI, and their quiz scores were low. But there was another group that kind of used AI as a tutor or a partner, and their quiz scores were much higher. So the AI group that did the best here was the ones that asked AI to generate code for them, but then asked questions about it. Why did you do it that way? Why does this work and not that? Generate this code for me, but also explain how and why you did it. Then there was an interesting group that did it pretty quickly and only asked conceptual questions and then did the code themselves. This actually is how I use AI most often in my computer science classes. We'll talk about something in class and I'll go back and say, tell me more about this concept. And let's like go back and forth and talk about it a little bit. And then sometimes I will also say, based on what we just discussed, what do you think I still need to strengthen? And then I will even ask it to generate practice questions for me that I will then do and kind of ask for feedback. So a lot of this is again saying that when you are engaging and trying to understand and do things yourself, you are getting better outcomes. So this research, the researchers said that as AI is getting aggressively incorporated into workplaces, that if people don't stay engaged cognitively, their understanding may be really shallow. But if you think more about understanding and skill development, we may be able to use AI in more useful ways. One other side note that I found really interesting is that the people who were not allowed to use AI found this learning task more fun. So that was interesting. So the group that did not use AI said they found this fun. The instructions helped them understand the programming library. They enjoyed it. In the group that used AI, they said they wished they paid more attention to the details. They said they felt lazy and that there were still gaps in their understanding. So there was this sense again of kind of this what we sometimes call cognitive surrender, which is giving up some of our own critical thinking. People enjoyed it less as a result. So those are some interesting findings that again might give us a good direction in thinking about how we want to experiment with AI. And then we've got some brain scans because who doesn't love a good brain scan? This again, relatively small study, as most of these brain scan studies are, from 2025 out of the MIT Media Lab. An interesting thing they did is that they asked people to come back to this task repeatedly. So over a 4-month period, people were asked to write essays with or without the assistance of AI. And if you can picture it, while they did this, they also wore little funny hats with electrodes coming out of them to assess their neural connectivity while they did this. So pretty funny looking while they did this, and they would kind of repeat this over a 4-month period. Some of the results here is that they found that essays that were generated with AI were much more homogeneous. They were much more similar to each other, and kind of had similar ways of writing about things. In brain scans, the people who used LLM had what is called shallower encoding. So they had less recall of what they wrote about. And what's really interesting is not only did they show less neural connectivity, there was actually a decline over that 4-month period. And there was a decline in how their essays were scored. So they became less engaged over time with LLM usage. The group that only used their brains had the strongest neural connectivity, so the most kind of engagement there. And interestingly, there's a third group that was just allowed to use a search engine, but not AI, and their results are kind of in the middle of that. So these are some of the things that they found. But then again, there's an interesting wrinkle here. And that is there was one group that was required to write the essays on their own for the first 3 months. And then the last time they did it, they were allowed to use AI assistants. And really interestingly, for this group, their brains lit up with new connections and new neural activity. And what the researchers saw is that there was kind of a re-engagement with this familiar task by approaching it in a new way. There was some novelty and real interest in what they could learn from that. And so one takeaway the researchers found from this is that it may be the timing of when we use AI tools in the process that can really help with our cognitive development. So it may be really thinking again, if we build that foundation of skills and then put AI on top of it, this may be interesting, engaging for us. We can learn from it. And this, they said, may be more optimal than using AI consistently from the outset. Gives us some kind of interesting glimmers of things that we might think about as we think about how we use AI in our own work. The next 2 studies I'm going to talk about more briefly, but I also found them interesting when we think about particularly our AI effects of AI on writing. So one thing that we're seeing across a number of studies is something that's called linguistic flattening, and that is more homogeneity when AI is used for writing. So this was a study, it was a group of West Coast universities, University of Washington, Berkeley, and some others, and they asked 100 people to write essays on the topic, does money lead to happiness? One of the things they found is that users who relied on AI submitted essays that had 50% fewer pronouns. What does that mean? It meant that when writers used AI, there was a shift toward more abstract impersonal language. There were fewer anecdotes and fewer references to human experience. So that was one of the differences that they saw. Another thing that was really interesting is that even when LLMs, large language models, were asked only to provide grammar edits, they went much further and started rewriting the essays. And so they sometimes changed the substance and even the conclusion of the arguments. So one of the things that would happen is once an AI got hold of this essay, it was much more neutral on this question of does money lead to happiness. Those essays took weaker stances than humans did. And this tracks with what we've seen in some other studies, that there is just less variety when AI is generating the writing than when people are doing it on their own. So that was an interesting one. And then one other study, and for some reason, this one stays strongly with me. This one's out of Cornell University. It's 118 people from India and the United States. And they were asked to write about different cultural traditions. So food, holidays, people who are important in their countries. And they were using a large language model that was really trained on a lot of text from Western countries. So 2 things that came out of this one. One is people in India started adopting more Western writing styles as a result of using AI input on their essays. And then a really interesting one is what was happening with autocomplete. So one of the things you see now, of course, is that AI is built into our Gmail, Microsoft Word. It's always offering to write things for us. And this was no different. So a number of the participants from India said that they were going to start writing about Shah Rukh Khan, who is a Bollywood film star who's very popular in India. But when they started to type his name, AI would say, "Oh, I know who you're talking about. You're talking about Shaquille O'Neal. Or you're talking about Scarlett Johansson." And so one of the things you see was not just a linguistic flattening, but actually a cultural flattening in terms of the references that are included. I mean, that is a very different result than these participants were intending. So for some reason, that one particularly stands out to me in terms of homogenizing the results that you get when you're using AI. So what I really think about here is all of these studies kind of pointing to the same conclusion of using AI to augment our work, but not replace our tasks. One of the reasons that I do not use AI to write my drafts is that I worry a lot about what's called the anchoring effect. This comes out of cognitive psychology. Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, obviously, very famous Nobel Prize winners. What they talk about with the anchoring effect is the very real human tendency for us to kind of stick to whatever's the first option that's presented to us. They showed this in a lot of different studies, but this is also true when you take the approach of AI writes the draft and then you edit it. What people often find is that it's much closer to that initial draft than it would have been if you had done your own work first and then asked for feedback. So that anchoring effect is very real in what we see in writing. There's also kind of a larger concern in that writing is very involved in our social transmission of knowledge. So across industries, one of the things that we need to do is we need our older workers to mentor younger people in workplaces and help them develop their skills. But we are starting to hear people say, why would I hire a junior person to do that when AI can do this for me faster and cheaper? So Matt Bean has an interesting book called The Skill Code, where he talks about this challenge that's only going to get larger. And one of the things that we need to do to be able to maintain this mentorship and be able to help develop skills in the next generation. So I know that a lot of people are probably listening to this and saying, yes, I understand all of this, but my boss wants us to use AI at work. How do I navigate that? And we'll talk about that in a second. But my conclusion from looking at all of this and my own experience as a writer is that we can't separate the thinking and writing processes. So the way that things work in our brains is not that we think about something and then we write it down. We actually discover what we think as we go through the writing process. And so these things cannot be separated. And so if we want to be strong thinkers and writers, we need to continue to practice these skills in tandem. So your boss wants you to use AI at work. Most don't know what that means. Or you suspect there's promise in AI, but you're not sure how or what. I would encourage you to experiment. I experiment with AI all the time. But a lot of what I do is I write my own drafts and then I ask for feedback. So similar to what you saw in the brain scan study about introducing this tool later in your process, that's what I like to do. So writing myself, and then I'll say, what other points should I consider? So this sometimes helps me anticipate counter arguments and be more persuasive in my writing. We all have biases and blind spots. So thinking about what perspectives might I be missing, this has been something I've experimented with some of my undergraduates that they have found interesting. And then I'll sometimes ask for targeted feedback if I have a particular paragraph that I know is off, and then ask for just more feedback than rewrite it for me. Because again, those issues with homogenization that we see, but just like tell me what's an issue. And I'm going to be really humble here, give you one of my worst recent sentences. So it might look something like this. I write an introduction of a couple of paragraphs. I have looked at it so many times. Give me some feedback. One of the things that it says is, it pulled out this humdinger of a sentence. And you know when you've looked at something a lot that you've written, and I looked at that, and I looked back at my draft, and I said, ooh, that is in there, and that is really bad. And then I went back and fixed it up myself, and I was thankful that I did not send it over to my editor. So some of that targeted feedback against once you have that solid foundation of skills, I think can be really helpful sometimes to elevate your work to the next level. So we've talked mostly about writing, and the studies have really talked about essay writing and critical thinking. But I did want to take a moment and talk a little bit about research because there are tools now like Gemini Deep Research that can write you a full white paper with hundreds of citations. And I've heard people say, well, why do we need researchers anymore? Gemini can do this for us. And so I just want to show you a little bit of, again, I do a lot of experiments, what kind of what happened for me when I gave an example and sort of saw what it would do. So I worked on a piece mostly last year that was an environmental and business story about mining. And the crux of the story was that we want to transition to this clean energy future, but to get the minerals and materials we need for that, we have to do a lot of mining, which is a very dirty industry. So how do we cope with that? So, I put a little prompt into deep research. If you've not experimented with it, one of the fun things about it is it will show you how it makes its research plan, ask you to review it, and then do the research for you so you can kind of see all the things it's going through. So it gave me the research plan. I wanted to see what it did on its own, and so I didn't edit it much. I should also say that I did this after I had done quite a bit of research and interviews. So I wanted to compare what I had already done to what it showed me. And then it went through this and it did a lot of research. If you have not experimented with AI in some time, the issue of hallucinations, while still there, is much reduced compared to what it was initially. So you will see it's looking at real websites, even useful websites. It's directionally, I think, going in a direction that makes sense for me. And these are some of the things that I screenshotted for you as I was looking at this. Um, and then this is just a tiny portion of what it went through. And so one of the things as somebody part of the way down my path, having done some interviews, is that it did hit on some things that dovetailed with what I was finding. So where that arrow is pointing to, its paragraph about sustainable mining methods, and that was really at the heart of my story. So it validated for me that I was going in a direction that was kind of appearing more broadly, and it was good for me to see that. What I would say, having worked on this story, I probably worked on this story for 6 to 8 months, is that had I gotten all of this at the beginning, it would have been so overwhelming. It would have taken me in many different directions and would have been really hard to focus. So I was actually happy to see this later in my process rather than getting really scattered. Because one thing is that AI can produce enormous volumes of work really quickly, and you can overwhelm yourself trying to sort through it. But I did find it interesting that there were some connections between what it found and what I wanted to do. The writing of this white paper was pretty different than what I would do for writing a magazine story. So you can see some of it here. You see that this is the beginning of the white paper that Gemini produced. It is directionally correct in terms of the ideas, but it is very abstract and very dense. I have a pretty high tolerance for dense reading, and I found it slow slogging to go through it. It also really seized on some of the words that were initially in my prompt, like paradox, and like kind of kept using them again and again. So again, like while I found it a helpful support, it could not have done the task for me. Just for contrast, the writing style that my editor and I used in the magazine piece was much more grounded in details of the physical world. We really wanted to make these abstract ideas concrete for people. So the opening of the magazine story is much more about picturing fields of wind turbines and banks of solar panels and people digging under the ocean, really like concretizing it in the real world, which is what AI is not so good at, but humans can do well. So again, I see this as potentially useful support, but is not really replacing the work that we can do. So all of this brings me to conclusion that we hear a lot that we are just going to be the human in the loop. AI is going to do the work for us. We are going to come in, validate it, check it. But what this research is really showing us is that if we do this, we are potentially jeopardizing our cognitive abilities and our critical thinking skills. So I really like to think about flipping this. I know many of you will say, again, like, you are asked to either use AI at work or give feedback about how you could use AI. I really like to think about this as AI coming into my loop, that I have control of the process. I am taking the lead on it and then asking for feedback, checking for understanding, seeing how I can get better, but not doing the work for me. And so this is what I would suggest for you, especially if you're not using AI at all. I do think it's really useful to try small experiments to see how it might work for you, thinking again that you are kind of the captain of that process. So that's what I want to leave you with. My hope is that we can develop AI that works for us. So what I would love to see is that humans retain what we think of as primary cognitive ability. So our cognition, our critical thinking, our voices, our diversity are really what is respected here. And then how do we build from that to use AI to help us? Maybe it can help us get feedback more quickly, learn more quickly, check for understanding. But again, with that solid skill foundation that I hope we all have. So that is what I have been learning about. I think there's some interesting directions in the research. I think there's a lot more to come. And I would really love to hear about how this is playing out in your workplace or any questions that you have. So I'd love to take some time now for questions, thoughts. How are things working or not working for you? And again, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, first of all, a big round of applause for Amy. Yay. So we can kind of get a question queue going. So Flavio and I are going to monitor the chat, and you're welcome to raise your emoji hand if you have a question. You can also just put a question in the chat. And let's see. I think I saw that there was a question, Flavio, from Fred. Um,
Yes.
Fred, I don't know if you're in a, we could throw it to you if you're in a position where you can talk and go on camera, or we're glad to try to summarize this a bit.
There he is.
Sure. Happy to. Can you guys hear me okay?
Hey,
Yep.
Fred, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was going on and off there for a while. Amy, thanks so much for sharing the research and your insights on this. And Matt, thanks for giving me the opportunity here. So the question that I put on the chat, an extensive one, was essentially what your thoughts are, and you may have answered it already, what your thoughts are about the growing narrative of some influencers, I think kind of going over the top and suggesting that we actually need to treat these bots as humans in order to optimize their value and their use, to actually think about them as a colleague. And in fact, I've had former colleagues, including chief human resources officers at other companies, talk about bots as if they were digital employees. And as soon as I've heard that, it really gave me some concern, a lot based on what you were just sharing in terms of the impact on actual people. So your thoughts on treating these bots like humans. My own point of view is that I think we need to be real cautious about coming anywhere near equating these bots as humans for a number of the reasons that you indicated. But to remember that they are bots, they're obviously going to continue to improve as the technology improves. But let's keep it real here. They're still computers, and that we need to be at the helm versus in the loop.
Fred, thank you so much. That's such a good question, and we really could have an entire conversation for hours about just that, right? It is something that I think about. One of the things that I think about is a lot of the development of these most advanced large language models is led right now by people who have this kind of quasi-religious belief that AI is potentially a successor species to humans. This goes kind of way beyond putting it in Microsoft Word or Copilot, right? So, um, I I am very cautious about this idea of treating AI as a colleague, because I do think that in the long run, we really risk outsourcing our critical thinking and losing our skills for kind of for the reasons that we've talked about. So, like you, I really think of it as a tool rather than as a colleague, and not thinking in the direction of more like an autonomous being. Um, but I do think that that is more, it's more of like a philosophical discussion. And I feel like we could talk about it for a long time, but I have heard some of the same things. So that, that's certainly out there.
Hey Flavio, I see, and I apologize. We're trying to monitor the chat, but if we missed anything, I think we've got a question and comment from Kat, and then from
Jonathan.
Jonathan. Do you
Yeah.
want to throw it to Kat if you're able to, if you'd like to go on camera? Hey,
Yeah. Yeah, I
hi.
can talk.
Hey,
Hi.
Kat. Thank you.
Yeah. I was just curious, the way I've been using it a lot, engaging with my writing, and I'm just really dyslexic, and I've gotten comfortable with using talk to text where I can just sort of word vomit all my ideas in a really nonsensical way. And then I've been giving, like, I can give like 3 pages of all my thoughts and feelings and ideas, and then say, make a draft of this that makes sense. And then been taking that draft and going back and forth. And I want to know, using that technique, how susceptible am I to anchoring? Because I hadn't thought about that, because it's putting so many of my original ideas into it, but I am letting it create the initial sensical structure.
Yeah, this is such a good question too, and you're not the first person that I've talked to who's using it in that way, and I'm glad it's working for you. I think the question that you might ask yourself the next time you do it is go back through it and say, sort of how big is the gap between what the arguments that I thought I was making and what I'm getting here? Because in some of this research, there was this tendency toward this homogenization or changing the structure of arguments. And a lot of times it's sort of watering down the argument, like making it more neutral. So I think it would be interesting, just like this is a great opportunity to just experiment with it for yourself and see, is it, how does it compare to kind of what I thought my starting point was? I do think that, we are all susceptible to this kind of cognitive offloading in the same way. So it's just something kind of to be aware of. And this is a great time for you to kind of see, is this a process that continues to work for you? Do you decide you want to shift it? I think this is a great time for experimentation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Flavio, I think
Thank you, Kat.
yeah, thank you
Yes.
very much, Kat.
Jonathan, are you in the chat able to unmute yourself, Jonathan? If not, I can read off the question. Jonathan would like to ask Amy about your thoughts in the growing evidence that people resent large language models texts rather than direct personal input.
So is the question about if something is
LLM.
if something is generated by AI, how people feel about it versus whether a human wrote it?
Yeah, I guess just the overall sentiment of people using LLMs rather than direct personal input.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that in the sense that AI is both ubiquitous and unpopular at the moment. So, I think, the the number of people who feel positive about it is relatively small. That said, I am still really open to its potential for us. I mean, it is a tool, and if we can use the tool to help us, that is great. When people discover that something has been written by an LLM, they like it less. So that is a real kind of consistent finding that we're seeing. This is also something to be mindful of, particularly when we think about that anchoring effect. If you've got something that's a little bit more, it's more homogenous, less personal, something, even if it was not written by an LLM, if it feels like it was, people are going to like that less. And so that is definitely something. I just saw something come into my inbox today that marketers are thinking about this a lot, in that AI can be really useful for speeding up their process. But if the result feels impersonal and consumers are not connecting to it, then that saved time is not going to be worthwhile. And so this is something that brands are thinking about quite a bit.
I I had an interesting conversation, maybe not the most interesting industry, roofing contractors and getting estimates. And I realized pretty quickly, I'm dealing with an AI like bot through text, right? Like capture my information. And I would like to talk, like if it was good, I'd be happy with it, but I'd really like to talk to a human. And ultimately, I got to the human, and the human said, "Hey, this is a trial that we're doing, and we've actually gotten kind of mixed feedback, particularly among older customers that are
Mhm.
just totally thrown by what are they like dealing with? You know what I mean? Like, it's supposed to like filter and help them, and I think like probably do kind of lead generation." And it was really interesting, like Amy, like having that conversation, because I know it's only going to get better, but it was at this point, it felt kind of wonky. Next
Yep.
question.
Matt, even Gen Z is growing resentful towards it, right? Especially for those environmental impacts that Amy mentioned early on. I think even across generations, it's becoming less popular in a way. We also have a question in the chat from Janet. When thinking of AI in the workplace, how can we begin to develop systems to use AI as a tool versus viewing it as a magic tool?
That's a good question, Janet. One of the things I think we're seeing a lot is that our managers feel pressure to show gains from AI. They know that this tool is everywhere, but again, don't know exactly what that should look like. And so I think that um, for all of us, this is a great chance for us to kind of take the lead and see how we want to use AI in our own processes, so that then you are not. It is difficult to be the person who reflexively pushes back, but also has not tried the tool themselves, right? That's not the position you want to find yourself in. But if you can come to your workplace and say, here's how I've experimented with it. This is what I've learned from it. These are the ways I found it useful. This is what I would recommend, in terms of, again, making it that tool and not that magic tool. Then you're kind of helping whoever is above you, and there's always somebody above you unless you're the CEO, and then you still have a board. So everybody is somebody that, um, then you are being a person who is kind of proactively proposing the solution rather than being the person who, you may still be the person who's like, these ways of using this tool, here's why I don't think this is so helpful for us. But if you can say, this is why, um, that is going to be really helpful. I think for all of us, there probably are ways that AI is helpful in some form of our process. And it's really kind of up to us as individuals. We're so early in this technology, figuring out what that might look like.
Thank you, Amy. I also want to acknowledge Sandra has been patiently waiting, I believe, with that check mark. Sandra, if you're still holding on to your question, feel free to unmute yourself. And then we'll go with Ashley. Thank you. I see your hand.
Hey,
Alrighty.
Ashley, are you
Go
able to
ahead, Ashley.
unmute?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect. Thank you, Amy, for this presentation. This is super interesting. I'm working on becoming a teacher, and with the youth, I'm almost thinking about it like, especially thinking through this anchoring effect. It's like you don't even want to introduce it below a certain age, for fear of them maybe becoming reliant on it or not knowing how to kind of put it later in the process, if you will. And so I was just curious if you had any insights on kind of like how young people are engaging with AI, how we might recommend that they engage with AI, anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you're becoming a teacher. That's great. What what grade are you planning on teaching?
High school,
High
secondary,
school.
but
Yeah, so this is going to be super relevant for you. Um, I think one of the things that across the research is that to use AI well, you really need that solid skill foundation first. And so I think the sequencing of it is really important. And there were a couple different studies where they talked about how introducing the tools later could be really useful. So I think really being strategic about maybe you're not doing it right off the bat until you see that solid skill formation. And then maybe it's useful for critique and feedback as you go through the process. Um, but I particularly am interested in that one study where for like the first 3 months, people didn't use the tool and then used it in the fourth month and saw like some interesting like increases in engagement. So maybe you've been working with students on a skill for a while and they've done some repetition of it. And then maybe to mix it up, then you introduce it and you say, given what you've learned so far and what you're practicing, how can this help you? But I think what we're seeing for people who are earlier in their skill development, that holding off a little bit, not ignoring the tools, but I find that students are super responsive to giving a clear explanation for why you're doing things in the order that you are. So if I'm saying to students, I want you to learn this, and then we'll add this on later, I've found students to be really receptive to that. So I wish you the best of luck in this brave new world that we're all part of.
I think we have a question, Flavio, from Sandra. And Sandra, I don't if you'd like to unmute and ask the question, you can do that, but we're also happy to hey Sandra.
Yes. Yes. Hello. Thank you. Thank you very much for this webinar. And just like the other, there was another person that talked about being a teacher. I have an interesting mix. So I teach ESL or English to high school students, and I have 9 languages spoken in my classroom. Nine. And I have different lessons. We need to differentiate different skill levels, and I we allow them, just like the other teacher spoke. We let them work individually on different skill sets. They form those things, but those skills rather. But there comes a point where they rely. I don't want them to anchor too much on AI because everything for them is faster, it's quicker, it's that instant gratification. So I'm afraid that if we overuse AI at this age, it should be limited somewhat just because once they develop the language, they're learning English, right? Once they get over that initial hump of learning the language, then I think they will over rely on the AI, and I just fear for this next generation, honestly, because it's challenging. We use it for some of our lesson plans, and we get extensive training at our district, but nevertheless, I think it should be monitored, especially with the elementary, middle, like these are the young formative years, and I'm sure many of you are parents. You're thinking the same way. How these kids are now relying, they're doom scrolling, they are looking at their TikTok, social media, and what are they really learning? So, yeah, that's all. But thank you very much. This was very interesting. I wanted to hop on this really quickly before I did some work for my own job. But thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And thank you so much for sharing your experience. I mean, you are really the expert here. You have watched students learn over the years. And so, your instincts are, I think now is the time for everybody to speak up about what they're experiencing and learning and suggesting you have a good sense of what over reliance looks like in your classes. And so I think like you are the right person to say, here is where I think boundaries can be drawn that would be useful for our students. It's I th- I think for a lot of us, it is going to be finding a balance. It's not going to be all yes or all no, but where might these tools be used in ways that are helpful to us and not hurtful? And bringing in your expertise from the classroom, I think, is going to be really key in helping to set some of those boundaries.
I think, Flavio, maybe we have time for one more
Let's take one more.
question and comment. And I apologize, Jonathan. I think I jumped out of order a bit because the chat jumps around. But Amy, this is a pretty good one. Jonathan says, Amy, please comment on E.O. Wilson's observation, the fundamental problems for humanity. We have Paleolithic emotions. Hold on. Medieval institutions and godlike technology. Any thoughts?
Oh, E.O. Wilson is always going to say things better than I could. That quote has come up, and man, that's what we're wrestling with, right? You know, we are we have incredible technology, we have incredible social institutions. I mean, we have an unbelievable body of knowledge that's been developed over the centuries and that has been shared through writing. We have so many cultural gifts around the world. And at the same time, we are animals, we are humans with emotions that get the better of us. Sometimes we don't do what we should, or the things we should do, we don't do. So, yeah, I co-sign with all of that. And it's something that we are just really going to continue to wrestle with as we always have. But we also have a lot of skills to meet these challenges, and we have a lot of cultural knowledge to draw on. And the more that we continue to talk about what we're seeing and experiencing, the more helpful we can all be to ourselves and each other going forward.
And what better words to close us off than with that, reminding each other to just take care of each other and being aware of your community. So thank you so much, Amy. For everyone who was leaving comments in the chat, feel free to follow up with us as well and continue the conversation. My contact information is listed on the screen. Feel free to share your contact information as well, anyone from DePaul who's joining us. And I think we can wrap up the session with that. Thank you so much, Amy, for joining
Thank you,
us.
everybody.
And
For
thank you
joining us,
all.
everybody. Professor Merrick, thank you so much for a great presentation.
Oh, thank you all so much. I appreciate it. It was great talking with everybody.
Happy evening, everyone.